the power of social media and the legacy media in general is that they can amplify the 1% and 2% to make them seem as though they're the 60 and 70% and trick the American people into thinking that their normal, wholesome views are the minority, but they're not. They're actually the majority.
Joining us today is grassroots conservative political activist Tracy Diaz, known to most as Tracy Beanz. She's editor-in-chief of UncoverDC and host of the podcast Dark to Light. We go back in time to discuss the rise of the Tea Party movement all the way up to the 2020 election and the role of big tech and corporate media in shaping our perception of reality. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Tracy Diaz, usually known as Tracy Beanz, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
I'm so glad to be here, Jan. Thank you so much.
So Tracy, you're a prominent voice, I think I could say, among, I would say, the group of people that are out there looking at this currently contested election that's saying the Republic is at stake. That's a big statement, of course, and I want to get you to talk about that. But you've actually been a conservative, sorry, that's not right. You've been a political activist for the better part of 20 years. And I just wanted to get you to kind of to trace your path to today.
Well, yeah, it's been a very interesting journey, that's for sure. Right, after 2001, after the attacks on New York City and 9/11, I was only 21 years old. I got very politically active, trying to figure out what was going on. Why did this happen? Why did these people not like us so much that they flew buildings flew planes into buildings and destroyed a city and a country? And from there, I just started learning about the American government more and became more passionate about how it worked, what it did, the different sorts of acts that were enabled after 9/11 to temper terrorism, etc. And as I did that, I just became very invested in American freedom, American values. I had a family in the military and stuff like that, so I was always very patriotic, but it really just took off for me at that point. And so I really dove right in, and it really became like my life's mission to understand and educate anyone I could get my hands on what was going on in the country and around the world.
Wow, there's a lot, I think, behind what you said. So, I immediately, as you were discussing post 9/11, you're talking about the Patriot Act?
Absolutely, yes. The NDAA, the Patriot Act, a lot of these things that went into motion for the sake of our freedoms here in this country, right? In order to preserve our liberty here from foreign actors or whoever they were trying to protect us from, actually encroached a lot on our civil liberty. And we gave up a lot of that in favor of security. And it really kind of bothered me that we did that. People didn't understand at the time that doing that would open up the door to so much more government control over our lives, our everyday lives. Everybody remembers having to take their shoes off at the airport and all of the stuff with the TSA. And, this stuff was disrupting Americans' everyday lives, and people just went along with it and did as they were told because it was keeping us safe. And I identified a problem with that because once you give power to an establishment or a government, you can't really get it back. It's nearly impossible to take it away from them once you give it to them. So I got kind of passionate and fervent about trying to explain to people why this wasn't the best idea and maybe we could do it another way. So yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about.
So, at one point you were actually looking at the Occupy Wall Street movement, right?
Yeah, we were down there in New York City in Zuccotti Park, because we were saying they were misguided about what they were angry about, the evil capitalists. Well, why don't you take a look at the Federal Reserve instead? Let's do a march to the Federal Reserve Bank instead of, sitting here in Starbucks with our our iMac typing away about how bad the evil capitalists are while you're basically consuming everything that you're fighting against. We were pretty successful. We got some folks to open up their eyes, but, back then talking about anything that was, outside of the mainstream in terms of, the government, how it worked, if there was a deep state, those words have become very popular. We were looked at as crazy. I mean, people thought we were absolutely nuts. We were relegated to our mom's basements and tinfoil hats. And so to see how far we've come it's a breath of fresh air because people scorned us for years. And now they're coming to accept some of the things we've been trying to say.
So what are these things exactly? And I mean, and I think that, you know, you became part of then the Tea Party movement in the Republican Party, and you're kind of bringing these ideas in through there. But what are these ideas that you're talking about here that you were scorned about, as you describe?
Well, you know, just the idea that there's a bunch of unelected bureaucrats that are sitting somewhere making decisions for the American people without any accountability or, you know, anyone looking over their shoulder to make sure they're doing the right thing, without being accountable to voters. You know, basically the seventh floor, as they call it now, the people that sit up there and they're SES or they can't be fired, and they're making policy, they're in NGOs, you know, they're guiding the direction of our country in a way that's not fundamental to what we're supposed to be as a republic. And funny enough, you know, I was part of the big Ron Paul push in 2008 and 2012, and we were very much anti-Republican because we identified the Republican Party was not for the people. They really weren't. They were very much about foreign wars and, you know, big money and just the antithesis of just the everyday American. And so we kind of fought against that a little bit, even though during the Tea Party we joined hands and we were rallying for freedom and less government. We weren't very much GOP establishment types at all. As a matter of fact, they used to call us the ragamuffins because we were the people out dressed, you know, in jeans and T-shirts out on the street protesting, and we weren't in suits and ties. They used to call us ragamuffins. So,
you know, things changed politically, or there was this I guess, anti-establishment or I guess questioning the establishment movement that the Tea Party ushered in on the Republican side. So tell me about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, people started realizing, wait a second, this is not what we want. You know, we don't want the Affordable Care Act. We don't want government mandated health care. We don't want, you know, higher taxes. We don't want. People started realizing again, the American dream was sort of going by the wayside, you know, because of powerful people in Washington, again, unelected and sometimes elected, who didn't have the American people's best interests at heart. And it was really the beginning of this sort of wave of the yearning for liberty again, the yearning for representative government again, that had been gone for so long, started back then during the Tea Party, but really, really has become mainstream now after the election of President Trump back in 2016.
You know, and you actually started blogging at some point, and I believe, I don't know if it was earlier or at the time when the WikiLeaks disclosures started coming out, but there was a lot there, and you actually, I think that's when you actually started amassing a following and becoming an influential voice, as you were kind of, you know, I guess explaining what was in there.
Yeah, you know, the difference is I was a very influential voice in like what was known as the Liberty Movement. I had a huge following. I was doing speaking events everywhere. And when I decided to jump in and support President Trump because I saw him as a counter to what we'd been seeing for so long in politicians running for president, I lost a lot of those folks. They weren't really interested. They thought I was selling out by supporting President Trump. And so I had to rebuild. And what I found is that the general public, not the longtime activist, was much more interested in all of this information. So when the WikiLeaks came out, I dove into them, and with this breadth of knowledge that I had gathered over the past gosh knows how many years, I started dissecting them for people in an understandable way so they could understand, you know, why is the Clinton Foundation so important? How come Kissinger is an important guy? You know, what does this connection mean? Why is Citibank picking the cabinet for Barack Obama? You know, all of those foundational concepts. And because Bernie Sanders had been cheated, for lack of a better word, out of his primary win for the Democrat nomination for president, a lot of progressive-leaning folks were coming to social media to try and learn more about what was in there, because that information was, you know, if you didn't know what you were looking for, it was very hard to decipher.
So these are beginnings of the site that you run now, UncoverDC.
Yeah, in one form or fashion. I started off kind of solo, and then I wanted to branch out and really fundamentally shift journalism back to, you know, make it honorable again, give people somewhere they could come where they could trust what they were reading. Not always easy to read. Sometimes there's going to be stuff that, someone you really like did that was it just wasn't right. It was wrong. It was corrupt, whatever. But we need to know these things as Americans so we can make informed decisions. We can't just, close the door on corruption that we don't want to hear because it just bothers us to know that this conservative did X, Y, and Z, or this Democrat I really like did X, Y, and Z. Powerful truth is important, and sometimes it's necessary. And I wanted to be someplace where people could trust that what they were reading was actually true and provide the background information for it so they could look for themselves. And we're really in this sort of information, zoo for right now, where nobody knows where to go, nobody knows what to look at, and then there's a bunch of just independent people doing their own research. It's beautiful, to be honest. It really is.
Well, so now we're getting into today, into the last few years. Of course, you've been writing quite a bit about, Russiagate, or what, the flip side of which is called Spygate, the whole scandal around it. You've been talking a lot about that. You've also talked with me offline about, essentially who it is that's thinking about these things, like who it is that's sort of out of the mainstream. It's actually quite a large number of Americans, right?
Yes, it is. I mean, look, this especially where we're at right now, and leading up to this country has been undergoing a really horrible time in terms of a power struggle. It's on one side, freedom-loving Americans who just want to put their country first and be prosperous and free and have their liberty. And on the other hand, it's almost a communist sort of takeover where these two ideologies are really battling. And then there's this establishment group of politicians and bureaucrats that really don't want America to be prosperous because then they're personally not prosperous. But the American people have woken up to this. It's almost like a light bulb has gone off of people's heads. And they've woken up to the fact that there is indeed this struggle going on for power here, and whoever wins in the end is going to set the tone for the next 20 or 30 years. So we're at a very critical juncture right now, and Spygate was just the beginning of an attempted coup on the presidency of the United States. We're learning so much more, and it's frustrating to me that there's been such a propaganda campaign waged against the American people on legacy media and more establishment media, that there's a half of the country, probably a little less, that just doesn't believe anything if it doesn't come from one of those places, and those places have been lying to them for decades. So there's a trigger for everybody. What is it that you hear that wakes you up all of a sudden? You're like, oh my gosh, wait, that can't be true. And then you do the research and you're like, ooh, that is true. What else isn't true? And then you just go down this road of figuring out, you've basically been lied to your entire life. And here you are in this brave new world. Where are we going? And that's a lot of the country right now. Everyday men and women going to work every day. They're figuring this stuff out. And it's really opening a lot of doors for folks to learn, how we fix this moving forward. What can we do right now?
Before we continue, I want to touch on something you said. You mentioned that I guess the people in the bureaucracy and so forth, they don't want America to be prosperous because if it is, then they won't be prosperous. Can you explain to me what you mean there?
Yeah, for forever, for the longest time. There's cushy government jobs, there's cushy lobbying gigs, there's a lot of money in war, there's, all kinds of these, again, non-governmental organizations and contracts and things like that these people that have been running for office and have been elected for this long are beholden to and expect, and their family expect it, and their sons and daughters expect it. And that doesn't happen if those institutions are reformed and fixed and made accountable again. How much government spending and waste goes into these contracts. Even if you just take Spygate as an example, you take a look at the Office of Net Assessment and what they paid out to certain people for useless papers about things and policy papers. This is the this is the American people's money that's being spent this way. And bureaucrats and politicians who have been entrenched in this forever expect those things. And if that dries up, their livelihood dries up and their power.
I want to now go back to you discussing the media, the powerful role that the corporate media play. And I'm thinking back to this very famous book, I think from the late 80s, Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky and another author. I forget his name right now. I remember reading this book, I remember thinking, okay, there's some interesting stuff here, but I didn't really think much of it because it basically alleged this large scale, sort of information control, information manipulation, essentially manufacturing the consent of the American people to the will of the elite, right? And I have to say, I've been thinking a lot more about this book over the last 5 years or so and what it was saying and, the truths in it.
It's sad, but it's true. But at the same time, what we've learned, if anything, from our own eyes and seeing social media and videos and people out in just even the turnout that was non-fraudulent for the 2020 election. The power of social media and the legacy media in general is that they can amplify the 1% and 2% to make them seem as though they're the 60 and 70% and trick the American people into thinking that their normal, wholesome views are the minority, but they're not. They're actually the majority. So it definitely is information warfare. There is no doubt. It is playing out right in front of us. And so many people understand that. I mean, you can just take a look at what happened to some major news outlets after Election Day and the changes and the way people have run and flocked away from them because they know they're being lied to. So it used to be easy, probably back in the day when that book was written, to pull one over on the people. But it's a lot harder now with the advent of social media. And I don't think that when they created it, they expected it to turn around like this. So the overreaction of these companies to censor ideas, to censor free speech, is in direct retaliation for those ideas taking hold, for people realizing they're not the minority, and empowering them to get together and to be activists and to organize. And it's really backfiring immensely. We had that warning on tweets for weeks. Are you sure you want to quote tweet this tweet? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I hit the round little button. I really just want to tweet this out. Can you just leave me alone? It's been something.
I have been thinking about this moment when Twitter and Facebook decided to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story from the New York Post and then other media, the Bobulinski emails and some others and so forth, as a kind of, I've been thinking about it as an inflection point of sorts in history, in a sense, because I mean, we've known that they have this raw power to control information, the combination of big tech and corporate media, but I don't think we had seen it exercised in such a way and so blatantly. What are your thoughts?
When you're being defeated, you act in ways that are unorganized. You don't think about your actions before. You just do anything you can to fix the problem, right? You act without thinking or strategy. And that's what they did, to be honest, because the story then became the censorship of the story. And more people, I think, then would have looked at it if they would have just kept quiet about it the way they normally would with something like that. More people's eyes were drawn to the sheer 1984-like censorship of the story and wanting to know what that story was than if they would have just said, okay, guys, just let's not talk about this. Let's just let this take its natural pathway. But they had looped in impeachment to this entire debacle. They, in the House, successfully impeached the President of the United States because he was asking about the very things we learned were true in these emails a few short months later. So they were all in on it. I mean, they were all in on keeping people from knowing this before the election. They were successful in a large way because a lot of folks after were polled by Rasmussen and others and said, if I would have known that, it would have changed my vote. Election interference, which we were supposed to be very careful about after 2016, was just flagrantly practiced by our very own media against the American people.
So President Trump got the most votes of any president, any incumbent president, certainly. So clearly there was quite a number of Americans that were interested in presumably his policy, his platform, and so forth. So who are these Americans? I mean, you have a bit of a beat on this, right? You've described it as a I don't know if it's an unexpected coalition, but a coalition of very different-minded people. Who are these people?
They're everyone. I mean, you, me, normal, everyday people who just want to save the country. This is not about President Trump for a lot of people. It's great that he's the guy because, most people that are fighting this fight right now absolutely love him and think he's been an amazing president. But it's not about that for a good majority of the folks that I speak to anyway. It is about the fact that we have lots and lots of evidence that bad people, who they are, I'm not going to speculate, stole this election from the American people and handed it to somebody who didn't deserve it. I think that most of the American public can handle a defeat that they've earned, but most of the American people cannot handle a defeat that was, scripted or something that was, they're stealing what this country is all about. They're literally yanking from the American people's hands their ability to choose their representatives, not just on the president's side, on, all the way down ticket. And that's a problem in a free society. And I think that most Americans that are very involved in this right now, which is a very large swath of Americans, realize that we're sort of at a precipice here where if we don't stand up and do something about this now, we're going to be in trouble, because if they can do this time, they'll do it every time moving forward. And there's been no accountability thus far. So people are very worried. They're worried for the sanctity of what this great country stands for. And that's really everyday Americans, carpenters, iron workers, coal workers, my neighbors, people that don't know what I do for a living. that talk. I was walking into the mall and someone stopped me and they were like, "Can you believe this?" They're just overwhelmed with fear, anger, trepidation, and passion.
There's a considerable number of people in the country that essentially, from what I can tell, believe there's, quote, no evidence of fraud, that it's all a big kind of sham by the president and other people who support him. There's even politicians that have called their colleagues that are raising questions about the contested election as, being seditious almost, or something like that. What's going on here?
There's, I think, a number of things going on. You've got a bunch of different groups here. You've got the people who really just don't know any better and are just listening to what their established bastions of truth have been telling them. And they really think, they believe in their heart of hearts that this is all just crazy Trump supporters and, Republicans trying to stop what actually was a really legit election because they can't take it. Then you've got the group of people that absolutely know what has gone on here, and they're lying to everyone else in order to get them to stay on the train of trying to, hijack this country, basically. There are numerous evidence, there's lots of evidence of fraud. If you just take a look at Jesse Banal and his statement in front of Congress the other day in front of the Senate committee, he laid out using data and lists from the Nevada DMV and death records and all kinds of stuff, all of the illegal votes that have been cast. And they like to talk a lot about disenfranchising voters. During the lead up to the election, if you required a signature on an absentee ballot, you were disenfranchising somebody who couldn't go out of their house because of COVID or whatever. All of those tens of thousands of votes in Nevada that were cast illegally disenfranchised tens of thousands of other people who cast their vote legally. Literally removed their vote from the tally. Their vote didn't count anymore. Wisconsin, the Supreme Court actually just ruled in favor of the GOP in Wisconsin, of the Republicans in Wisconsin. There was an indefinite confinement issue where 200,000 or so ballots were cast incorrectly under this arcane law, not following guidelines that are now all in question, greater than the margin of victory. And this is consistent in many different states. You don't have to take a look at just the Dominion voting issue, the machine issue. Take a look at everything else. Pennsylvania, completely legitimate constitutional challenges. Georgia, video evidence of shenanigans going on. I mean, it's right. You know, I was watching a hearing where there was a senator from Georgia saying, but our Secretary of State told us this wasn't true, but the video was playing right next to her of what the Secretary of State denied being true. So we're at this like crossroads of, you know, don't believe your lying eyes. Let's gaslight the entire country into thinking that this didn't happen. But then you've got GOP representatives in Congress, certain senators, people inside of Pennsylvania whose state is being sued by Texas, jumping on board Texas's side of the lawsuit to sue their own state. You know, this doesn't happen for some conspiracy theory. We're in the midst of a contested election in the United States of America. It's very real. And it's just ultimately how it's going to play out that'll make a difference.
So, you know, for the typical person, and frankly, you know, even for myself, right, when people are dealing with basically such fundamentally different sets of information, how can they communicate? I mean, I'm asking you because you've been in this situation where you've been speaking to people of quite widely different political views and, you know, and catching their attention. As far as I can tell, this situation right now is one where people are just dealing with fundamentally different information and pretty sure they're right about the information they have.
Yeah, on one side, the there was no fraud side. The problem is that they don't have any information. If they were more easily, if it was more easily available to them, if somebody could say, look at this, like, for example, print out the 36-page report from Peter Navarro and sit it down in front of someone and have them just read it. And then ask them, can you tell me what part of this you think is false? I mean, it's as simple as that. And that comes down to everyday Americans doing that with their family around the Christmas to the Christmas dinner table, as sad as that sounds, or whatever. I mean, it's that important. You know, a lack of information causes you to make absolutely horrific decisions in any situation in life. So I don't think it's that there's two different sets of information. I think there's a lack of information that people who have a lot of information on this side.
Tracy, one of the criticisms I've heard about the whole MAGA movement and has been, I guess, a certain sort of fervor or unquestionable loyalty to President Trump. People, at least this is what people are alleging. And I think you're kind of in a unique position to talk about this. What do you think?
So I don't think it's loyalty to President Trump. I think that it's loyalty to this idea of somebody or a way to be the underdog or the guy who's going to change it all, right? The person that's representing the everyman. The idea that it doesn't have to be some swampy sort of establishment figure at the helm of the country, and that the every American can kind of win. And they're passionate because over the past 5 to 6 years, they've learned that basically everything they've known their entire lives was a lie. And when you first realize that you've been lied to that significantly on such a broad scale, you want to tell everyone you know about it. You want everybody to understand that they too have been lied to for basically their entire lives. And you get very passionate about that, and you want to scream it from the rooftops. And it comes off as off-putting to people who are just not there, who are just going about their daily life. They don't understand what's going on, but you do, and you want to tell them. And when that first happens, you're overwhelmed with that passion. It's hard to explain, actually. And so that's what we're experiencing with a very large swath of the American population who say, oh my gosh, this outsider, came into the White House. Look at what we've accomplished. Look at what we've been able to do. This has been absolutely amazing. I care so much about my country. I've got this renewed sense of patriotism. I want to make sure people are held accountable for the bad things they've done. Everybody wouldn't be coming after him like this if he was, doing something wrong for the American people. Like, we know what's been going on for the past 20, 30, 40 years. He's changing it all. It's not about him. It's the idea that it can be done. He's a great representative of that. He is the perfect person to do it. And he's shown that he will. And that's why people are still fighting, in my opinion. That's why it's off-putting to people, because they just don't get it.
It's fascinating because it's, I guess, a bit unexpected, right? A billionaire from Queens to have taken on this. I mean, you're basically saying he's a sort of like a talisman, or he kind of represents this idea.
Yeah, he does. And he represents, as much as he is a billionaire from Queens, he's a normal guy who just happens to be a genius and represents Americans. He understands them. He understands what we need. He understands what we want. He understands what we care about. He cares about us. I've never seen a more transparent president before. I've never seen a president who cared so much about, who connected so much with the American people as this president does. You feel like he's your friend or your uncle or your cousin, down the road or whatever. That is the way it's supposed to be. We have grown accustomed to being thought of as subjects, and it's actually the opposite way around. In this country, we are their boss, and people have forgotten that over the years. We tell them what to do. They represent us. It's not the other way around. President Trump allowed that to be at the forefront, and he said it many, many times as well.
So how do you respond to this? One of the most common things that I hear, again, from corporate media, in fact, people in the White House press room have literally said this to the president, from what I saw, but basically that he lies.
He doesn't lie. He doesn't lie. Trust me, I have searched and searched for lies. They don't exist. The man is probably the most, outside of General Flynn, is probably the most investigated gentleman on the face of the earth. They say whatever they need to say to be able to advance their narrative. Ask them for specifics. What did I lie about? The Leslie Stahl interview has come up several times over the past few weeks, where they were sitting down and she was basically saying, there's no evidence that you were we have to present facts on this show, Mr. President. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is running around saying, I never did any work with Ukraine or China. It's the upside down. Get better people in that press room immediately, because there needs to be counters to that. There needs to be.
Well, so then let's get to the big question in mind that we started off here with, which was, your assertion that in all of this right now, the very republic is at stake. What do you mean when you say that? It's
if we are unable to conduct elections with integrity in a republic, a constitutional republic, where our entire governmental system, the rule of law, everything is based on the vote, then we cease to exist as a country. It is absolutely abhorrent that we have law breaking going on across the country all the time by people who are supposed to be working for us to make sure that these things go the right way. And for anyone to think they can come in and steal the American people's choice, it's a grave injustice. It's the destruction of the fabric of what our country stands for. And I just will not allow that to continue without doing my part, whatever that may be, to try and save it. And I think that Americans need to really understand it's not about you being a Democrat or a Republican. If you're a Democrat, you need to understand, you think you might be doing something noble here by either not learning about what's going on or not being active in the process, or maybe you know that there's been cheating, but you just don't really care because you got your desired outcome. You need to understand that this is a precipice for this country right now. If we cannot count on our elections We no longer live in a constitutional republic. The Constitution is not worth the piece of paper that it was printed on all those years ago anymore. And it's that important. It really is.
So what would satisfy you in terms of, basically resolving the question of the contested election?
I think that what would satisfy me would be legitimate forensic audits of all of the machines in the contested states, legitimate signature audits in all of the contested states and counties where there are people that are allowed to be watching, that are allowed to be participating in the process as per law, where there's transparency. And if at the end of the day, after all of this checking and double checking is done and everything's investigated, and the American people can see that process and feel confident that it's been done correctly, if then President Trump didn't win, he didn't win. But I don't believe after, stopping of counting and hundreds of thousands of ballots being all of a sudden injected into the count, mathematical, statistical improbabilities happening, the antithesis of what most of the honest polls said all of a sudden happening. We're being asked to believe that all of these things that are nearly impossible all happened all at once at the same time on the same day. And when we ask questions about it, we're being told that we're not patriotic and that we're treasonous and that we're seditious. Does that sound normal to you? It's not. It's not normal. So I want it to be audited. I want the whole thing laid out. And at the end of the day, if that's done, then I'd accept a loss, but I don't think we did.
So there is an important election still coming up, very, very soon in Georgia, the Georgia runoffs. So how is that looking to you right now?
I've seen a lot of people directing Georgians what to do with their vote in the Georgia election. And that bothers me. Vote's a very, it's a personal thing. And I don't feel like anyone should dictate to others what they should do in any given scenario. But the process is shaping up to be just as bad as the general was. And if the general was run correctly, we might not need a runoff. So I think that getting to the bottom of what happened in Georgia might alleviate the need for this election in the first place. And it's weird to watch this landscape where there's everybody begging everyone, please go out and vote, please go out and vote. But then other people are like, well, how they're doing the same thing. How are you going to know if your vote even really counted? I mean, people have lost faith in the election process on both sides. Regardless of what happens at the end of all this, people have lost faith in the election process. That's a horribly terrifying place for us to be in this country. And I don't know, whatever Georgians do is they're smart people and they'll do. But what's the point if they're just going to do the same thing over with the cheating and the lax rules and the drop boxes and everything else? It's horrible. It's really sad.
So, but presumably this is something that can still be corrected.
Well, we hope so, but they're not doing much to correct anything. I mean, nobody's taking the action needed. Like, they're already saying, you're going to keep people out. They're not going to be able to get closer than 6 feet, but then they don't let you. The signature audit they're doing right now, they're not letting watchers in to watch. I mean, they're stuck 60 feet away. Gentlemen are taking pictures of themselves like we can't see anything. That's after all this has been uncovered. What's changing? I haven't seen anything change. I mean, I have no confidence in what's going on there. If they would just let poll watchers in, that would give me confidence. If they would do a hand count after and a real audit, a pen and trace audit afterwards, and really audit the vote in all of these places afterwards, immediately afterwards. If they didn't kick people out and keep counting when they were gone just because they didn't want them to see. If they didn't pull ballot boxes from underneath tablecloths in the middle of the night and start counting based off an excuse we learned was not even true. If the transparency, that's all sunlight. Give us sunlight on this election, and then I'll be confident. Until then,
So there are a few dates that are, I guess, coming very quickly. You described a little earlier what would satisfy you in general. We're looking at, I think it's January 6th, and then we're looking at, of course, January 20th. Is there enough time to resolve this?
Yeah, I do feel there is, and I think that confidence is growing, and it's really up to the American people to keep fighting here, because if you give up and go home, then the public needs to be vocal and loud about this so that the representatives who are representing you know what your voices are saying. If you're screaming for them to do the right thing, they'll likely end up doing it. And there's more and more investigations happening. There's a controversy in Arizona right now. There's a Supreme Court decision in Wisconsin. There's stuff going on in Pennsylvania. They sent challenging and competing slates of electors to the Electoral College because they wanted this to continue to get more information for the American people and to figure out what went on here, to understand it. And at the end of the day, if they can't figure it out in time, then our congressional representatives and our senators have a duty under the Constitution of the United States of America to decide what they're going to do with these slates of electors moving forward. The Constitution rests this power strictly in their hands, and they should really sit down and pray a little bit and decide how they want to move forward, because it's really all on their shoulders.
Tracy, any final thoughts before we finish up?
Thank you for having me here today, and letting me talk to your audience, all of whom respect you so much, and as do I. I mean, you've done a fantastic job. I just want to say, it's very important if you find an information source that you can trust, like the Epoch Times or like, UncoverDC, make sure you share that stuff with your friends, get good information in front of people, empower them to make good decisions. We're in the midst of some crazy times right now, but stay positive and just keep fighting, because it's very important what we're fighting for. And I love and appreciate all of you.
Well, Tracy Diaz, or Tracy Beanz, such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much.